I had the most powerful confession of my life when I was about 16 years old. I had been going to confession for many years at that point, and my experience up to that point had always been about the same. I would say more or less the same sins. I would get my 3 Hail Marys, and then I would move on. Nice and easy. However, on this particular day, I was in a different city, in a different diocese, with a priest that I had never met. I said my sins. I don't particularly remember them, though I could kind of imagine the typical things that 16-year-old me would have said. Again, doing my part nice and easy. Then, when it was time for the priest to give me my 3 Hail Marys, he didn't. He started asking me questions about my sins. He wanted me to be more specific. I resisted, and he just tried to go deeper. He wanted me to talk about why I did those things and how I felt when I did those things. He was not going to let me get away with being vague. I felt completely raked over the coals. Eventually, he gave me my penance, and though I don't remember it much now, we finished and I left the confessional. As soon as I returned to the pew, I began to weep. I felt like I had been stripped bare in that moment, and I realized that God was putting me back together. In hindsight, I went into that confessional purposefully being vague about my sins because I didn't want to acknowledge them. And through the priest, God was saying, "Don't hide from me." He was telling me, "See, I can know the deepest parts of you and still love you." Our psalm today is the most famous psalm and one of the most famous parts of the entire Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want." This is a really interesting phrase because lords and shepherds are pretty much opposites. Lords are powerful rulers of men, and people do what they tell them. Shepherds have such little power that the only thing they get to rule is smelly, dumb animals. Yet our God is both. When I went to confession that day, I approached the confessional expecting a shepherd, someone to be my comforting, what I saw as a peer. Inside the confessional, though, I encountered my Lord, whose authority over me was obvious. When I sat in that church afterwards, I realized that he was that shepherd that I was looking for, and he was sitting right beside me in my lowliness. When we think we know what to expect from God, we can often quickly realize we don't know nearly as much as we think we do. I think we've been this way all along. The Jewish people knew that God was their Lord. They famously were waiting for a Messiah to come, to rise to power, to defeat the Romans who held them and their holy city of Jerusalem. Of course, they would be looking for a powerful Lord. The Old Testament is filled with stories of their God, our God, doing battle with the gods of other nations. The plagues are a famous example of God doing battle with the Egyptian gods. Elijah famously mocked the prophets of Baal who could not light the fire of sacrifice when Elijah and God could do it even after it was soaked in water. The Jewish people knew that God is the Lord, and they were ready to follow his rule. Even the pagans knew that whichever God was really God would be powerful. When Jesus then showed up as a shepherd, ready to smell like his sheep and preaching repentance and forgiveness even for the Romans, they didn't know what to think. What do you mean, forgive my brother 77 times? What do you mean, turn the other cheek? This was not the God they were expecting. Today, how many of us are the exact opposite? We have heard turn the other cheek 1,000 times. It's not revolutionary to us anymore. Our world has been so shaped by Christianity that we don't even recognize when it surrounds us. The sayings of Jesus are now 2,000 years old, and we don't bat an eye at them anymore. We know that Jesus is the good shepherd. But how willing are we to accept Jesus as Lord? How willing are we to accept that Jesus has real authority over us? After all, doesn't Jesus just want us to be nice to each other? Are we willing to accept that he can, in fact, make rules and expectations for us? Can we handle that we are called to conform our lives to his will? The Lord is my shepherd, and the shepherd is my Lord. He is both, not one or the other. If Jesus was just a shepherd, today's gospel might have gone like this. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, he said, it's so awesome that you all came to see me. Y'all are just amazing. You all get to go to heaven. If Jesus was just Lord, it might have sounded something like this. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, he said, "Do you not know that I came here to rest and smote them with fire and brimstone?" But instead, Jesus is both Lord and shepherd. And when he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Jesus knows we need to be loved and cared for by someone close to us. He also knows that we are weak and incomplete, and he teaches us what we need to know to be better than we are right now. The ancient pagan would read this story and say, "What do you mean he pitied those weaklings?" The modern pagan would read this story and say, "What do you mean he taught them? Aren't we all just perfect the way we are?" The true Christian must wrestle with the reality that God is both Lord and shepherd, even in moments we would prefer him to be one and not the other. We need to undivide the shepherd and the Lord in our world, and it starts with undividing the Lord and shepherd in our own lives. Today's second reading talks about Jesus making one person from the two, that he might create in himself one new person in place of the two, thus establishing peace and might reconcile both with God. Now, this certainly means that we need to unite ourselves more closely to God's will for us, but might it also mean that we need to unite our images of God as Lord and God as shepherd instead of separating them? We sometimes have to work to overcome preconceived notions, to accept that God is both, and seeing him as both calls us to a more complete life of faith. There are times in our lives when we will go astray and get lost, and we need our shepherd to come find us and bring us back. There are also times when we need someone with authority over us to say, "That way will hurt you. Don't go there. Come with me. I know what's best for you." If one of those is easier for you to accept than the other, then maybe it's time to lean into the aspect of God that's harder for you. If it is easy for you to accept that God is your Lord, then maybe we need to be a little more patient with those who seem to wander away and get lost a little too often. If it is easy to accept that God is your shepherd, maybe we need to be a little more open to his authority through the church. A great way to start taking these steps is the same place that I started today, confession. Maybe you haven't gone to confession in a while because you have the impression that God doesn't really care what we do, so what's the point of confessing it? Go to confession and let yourself feel the gentleness of God's authority. Maybe you haven't gone to confession in a while because you did something you think no one can forgive. Maybe people in the church, even some of us here, have given you the impression that you aren't wanted here or wanted by God, that God lords his power over you and can't forgive it. We recognize that human shepherds sometimes do a bad job of leading their flocks. That's exactly what the first reading warned about. But God is better at this than we are. Go to confession and feel the gentleness which the true shepherd offers to his lambs. God is not always what we expect, but God is always what we need. When I went to confession that day, I wanted a shepherd but encountered my Lord. And as soon as I recognized that I was with my Lord, I realized he was, in fact, a shepherd too. For the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. In verdant pastures he gives me repose. Beside restful waters he leads me. He refreshes my soul. He guides me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk in the dark valley, I fear no evil. For you are at my side with your rod and your staff that give me courage. You spread the table before me in the sight of my foes. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and kindness follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for years to come.